Welcome to this GCSE English revision video which looks at the 7th poem in the AQA Spec B pre-release booklet, Beginning in a City 1948 by James Berry. We'll start with some details about the poet. James Berry was born in Jamaica and therefore has strong Caribbean roots, but he famously emigrated to Britain in 1948 on the Empire Windrush. In this poem there are clear themes of coping with a strange place and the idea of new beginnings. A bit of historical context will help you understand why Berry's account is significant. The Empire Windrush sailed from Jamaica to Tilbury, just east of London, in 1948. It brought the first West Indian immigrants to Britain, a total of 492 people. They had answered an advert for workers to go to the UK to help improve the British economy, which was struggling after the Second World War. This straightforward map gives you a visual idea of the route the ship took to get from the Caribbean to Britain. Here are the points we'll look at during this commentary. First, what was James Berry thinking before he arrived? Next, his first impressions of London life form the majority of the poem, and we'll look at his attitudes to his new home. As usual, we'll finish off by summarising the poem's message and highlighting examples of language and structure you can use in your exam answer. Cultural references will be mentioned throughout. The start of the poem provides an insight into Berry's reasons for leaving Jamaica and his idea of what London will be like. He gives two reasons for emigrating. First, stirred by restlessness, suggests he was keen to see new places and perhaps travel and explore the world. Second, he felt pushed by history, which is a reference to the effect World War II had on Britain's economy and workforce, and highlights the need for Britain to ask its colonies for help. His expectations of London are grand. He calls it the centre of empire, a reference to the British Empire, which at one point in 1922 covered nearly a quarter of the globe and was the largest in history. However, his expectations are not met at all once he starts to make his way through the city, and this also hints at the demise of the empire, especially after World War II, when Britain granted many of its colonies independence. His first impressions are many and varied, and are mostly negative. First, he feels lost. I knew no room, I knew no Londoner, I searched without knowing. The repetition here emphasises how alone and lost he feels in such a large built-up area. It is completely unlike his Caribbean island. The city is presented as gloomy and depressing. Dim-lit streets suggests a lack of light and conveys a tone of sadness and despair. The people are described negatively as well. He says Londoners are war-tired. Even 3 years after the end of World War II, they still suffer the effects. They move slowly like dark-coated bears in a snowy region. They wear drab clothing to protect themselves from the cold and walk slowly as though the weight of the world is on their shoulders. It is clear Berry feels he doesn't fit in. I, in my Caribbean gear, shows he is the odd one out and was not prepared for the cold. London's weather is in complete contrast to the constant sun of Jamaica. He describes himself as a half-finished shack in the cold winds. This suggests he feels exposed and vulnerable, and not just to the weather. He feels he sticks out, and perhaps that everyone is looking at him. There is a temporary positive first impression, one of awe. I walked fantastic stone streets in a dream. Here the reader can imagine him wandering open-mouthed in amazement through London. But his feeling is quickly replaced by more negativity when he finds some accommodation. It is a closed-walled room, suggesting claustrophobia and no windows. It is lit by a dying, shadeless bulb, which conveys the light as weak and dim, and he is given only a pillowless bed and a smelly army blanket. Conditions are not exactly the luxury he dreamed of. Perhaps a good night's sleep will improve things. No. In the morning, he crawled out of bed, suggesting fatigue and a bad night's sleep. He has wooden legs and a stiff-armed body, which means the bed was uncomfortable and has caused him pain. Then there is the cold. He has a frosty bored face which I patted with icy water. There's not even a little warmth or hot water to make himself feel better. When he finds the communal area in the building he is staying in, he meets fellow inmates. He sees the place as a prison rather than a hotel or a guest house. When he enters the room, he says, "A rage of combined smells attack me." This makes the reader think he is angrily assaulted by a lethal cocktail of poisonous gases, and he highlights the fact he is different because he is not used to the smells. He says, "I alone was nauseated and choked in deadly air." No one else seems to be affected by the odour in the room, just him. Finally, there is a return to loneliness. I walked without map, without knowledge. It's day 2, and he still feels alone and isolated. Once again, repetition reinforces this feeling. So there are a range of the poet's attitudes which are conveyed through the tone of the poem. There is false joy when he says he is inflated with happiness by finding a room. His joy soon disappears when he sees its condition. It turns to disappointment, all the comfort I had paid for. This is sarcastic and shows how his expectations of London are not being met. There is even disgust when he says, I alone was nauseated and choked in deadly air. He is comparing the smell in the room to poisonous gas to show how intolerable it was to him. The end of the poem, however, contains a sense of relief mixed with trepidation, which is a bit more positive. So I had begun in London. He is relieved to have met another person from the Caribbean who has helped him to get started, but the repetition here suggests nervousness or trepidation about him starting out on his London adventure. The poem's message is threefold. First, there is the importance of memories. This poem is a personal memoir for James Berry, as he says, "Those packed impressions I never looked at in all those years." The poem is a way of him remembering and recording those first couple of days in London, clearly an important event in his life, despite the fact he doesn't seem to have properly thought about them. There is the theme of fitting in, belonging, to show how difficult it is to feel like you belong in a strange place that is so different from your original home. And there is the sense of adventure, but also of fear when you undertake any new beginning. The last line, "I had begun in London," contains this mixture of feelings. There are plenty of examples you can write about to show how language and structure are working in the poem. The poem is written in free verse, which means no regular rhythm or rhyme scheme. Instead, Berry writes his account like an autobiography, memoir or diary entry to convey a sense of realism and to point out that this was both personally important to him and a historically significant event. Berry employs repetition for emphasis. "I walked without map, without knowledge," reinforces the idea he is lost through the repetition of "without," and "I had begun in London" emphasises his relief and fear with the repetition of "begun." He also uses short sentences again to emphasise how he feels. For example, "I knew no room, I knew no Londoner." These short sentences convey his loneliness. Just as the sentences stand on their own, he too is isolated. There is a simile. "People moved slowly like dark-coated bears," suggests Londoners are tired, plodding, and battle the cold. Berry also uses several metaphors. "Stirred by restlessness" suggests Berry wants to explore. "Pushed by history" conveys the idea he is forced to travel to Britain because of historical events, i.e. World War II. "The centre of empire" tells us that Berry, as a Jamaican, sees London as a magical city which is the capital of a huge British realm. "A half-finished shack in the cold winds" suggests how isolated and vulnerable he feels. "Inflated with happiness" shows how he feels re-energised by finding a room, puffed up like a balloon. Finally, "choked in deadly air" gives the impression that he'll be gassed to death by unfamiliar smells. There is personification too, when he says, "A rage of combined smells attack me." It's like he is physically assaulted by the odours in the room. And "dying shadeless bulb" makes us think of the light as elderly and near the end of its life. Berry uses punctuation for effect. "I saw a queue of men, dash, some black, dash, and stopped." The dashes here make the reader imagine him doing a double take when he notices someone who looks similar to him. This is the reason he stops walking. Then there is his use of dialogue. For example, "What happening, brother?" Sorry about the accent. Anyway, the conversation is written in the Caribbean dialect to add realism so that we can imagine the accent they use. It also gives the account a more personal dimension. To finish, some information about this photo in the background. This is Windrush Square in Brixton in London. Around a quarter of Brixton is populated by people of African or Caribbean descent, and so it has become the unofficial capital of the British African Caribbean community. The square was redeveloped and opened in 2010 to mark the significance of the arrival of the Empire Windrush to London. This makes the poem's account of Berry's first few hours in London historically important. So that concludes this commentary on Beginning in a City 1948. Please look at the PortchesterSchool YouTube channel for more helpful videos, and don't forget to tell us what you think. Thanks for watching, and good luck in your exams.